Hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, a Zen garden. Do you guys remember when Zen gardens were a thing? They were a box of sand with decorative pieces in it, and you had a little rake, and it was soothing to be able to play in the sand with this little rake and make your patterns, etc., etc. Do you remember that? Well, then you're in luck, because we're bringing them back this week. There's a lot of different processes in this build. I'm hoping to have a lot of fun with it and kind of let loose with it. We're going to see how it goes. I don't know if it'll be one part, two part, etc. But whatever it takes, it takes. We're going to have a lot of fun here. I hope you guys are going to join me with it. And it all starts off with some 1/4-inch walnut. So this build starts by cutting the frame pieces. I've chosen walnut for my frame. You can choose whatever species you'd like. It's 1/4 inch thick, and each piece is 2 5/8 inches wide. Now we have 2 pieces each that are 8.5 inches long, and 2 pieces each that are 11.5 inches long, and they will make up the frame. Put your shorter pieces aside and choose which one of your longer pieces you wish for the front face of your frame. I think I'll choose this guy. And what we need to do now is draw and cut an opening in this. Now our opening will be for a drawer that we're going to add later. So for now, we need to place a mark from the bottom at 1 1/4 inches up all the way along our piece. Now I know this isn't going to show on camera, but you'll have to trust me that it's here. And there we go. There's our line right there at 1 1/4 inches up from the bottom. We now want to place a line 1 inch in from either end, and we'll connect it to the 1 1/4 inch line that we just drew. From here, we'll take this over to the table saw. We're going to cut these lines here by setting our blade at 1 1/4 inch height and using our miter fence to cut them. And then we'll cut this line here with the scroll saw. I'll come back and see you when I get that done. Well, I have my frame clamps set up, and what we're going to do is we need to assemble the frame of our Zen garden. So our long pieces will just sit here in our frame, just like this, and our shorter pieces will actually be butt jointed here onto the ends of our 11.5 inch pieces. Now you may be thinking, what's the deal with the butt joints? Don't worry about it. We're going to deal with that a little bit later on. Now what I've done is taken a piece of 1/4 inch MDF or hardboard, whatever you want to call it, or whatever you have available, and this will be cut into the bottom. It is 11.5 inches long and 8.25 inches wide, and I have cut out these recesses here so that this little lip will stick out the front of our opening. So what I'm going to do is I'll just show you how this goes together. That'll just slide in like that. We'll just tighten up our frame clamp here just so you get an idea of how it glues together. There we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give all of these pieces a light sanding, especially mostly on the inside actually, just areas that I won't be able to get at later on. And we're going to glue this whole assembly together. Just make sure that you check it for square as you go to make sure that it's perfectly squared up and that nothing is off kilter. And we'll go around now and as best we can clean up all the squeeze out, then put this aside and let it dry up. Now because of the frame clamps, we do have a little bit of squeeze out here that was underneath the clamps that we weren't able to clean up. So I'm just going to use this mini scraper here. We're going to clean up those glue squeeze out areas. We won't go too crazy because There's another accent piece that goes on here later that will actually cover up any of this. So just get it flush so that you don't have any large lumps of glue sticking out. Well, it's now time to make the legs for our Zen garden. And all I've done is taken some scrap walnut, 1/4 of an inch thick. It needs to be at least 1 inch wide. This is a little wider because it was an offcut. It's 3 inches long, and on one edge, I've cut it to 45 degrees. What I've also done is I've drawn out this little template here. It's really nothing special, just a couple curves. It's 1 inch wide. It comes down to about 1/4 of an inch in thickness down at this bottom end. And all I'm going to do is use this as a template. And we need to make left and right pieces of our leg. We're going to line up our 45 degree against the straight edge. And on the flat edge of our template, we're going to line it up, top and bottom, and trace it out. Once we get all 8, 4 left and 4 right traced out, we're going to head over to the scroll saw, we're going to cut them out, and then I'll see you after that. Well, I've given our main box or our frame a good sanding all over, and it's now time to attach the legs that we've just cut. So I have a piece of 3/4 MDF here, so a nice flat surface that we want to put the piece on. I have wax paper down so that we don't stick it to our flat piece. And we're going to take 1 left and 1 right of each one of our legs, line it up on each of the corners, just like this. And once we're happy with the alignment, we'll glue those legs in place, and we'll do that for each one of our 4 corners. And now you just want to get in there with a cotton swab and some water and clean out the squeeze out. So while we're waiting for our legs to dry, we're going to cut our top trim and fit it in place. And it's just some 1/2 inch thick walnut. I've cut it to be 5/8 of an inch wide, and it's 16 inches long. On the one side, I've cut a 1/2 inch by 1/4 inch dado, or rabbet rather, which will leave this 1/8 inch thick lip. And we're going to cut it in such a way so that it's mitered on the corners, and it will be the top trim of our entire case. So you want to get those pieces cut up, and we will fit them in place, but don't glue them up just yet. Now that our legs are dried up, we're going to remove this frame clamp and give the legs a good sanding. Once we get the sanding done, we can then glue in place our mitered frame for the top edge going around our Zen garden. And just like we've always done, make sure you go in and clean up all of this squeeze out, as this area will be extremely visible. So give it a good cleaning and then put it aside to dry. Well, I've cut some pieces of scrap here to make the drawer insert. And I've made it so that it's 1/8 of an inch shy of whatever the width and the depth is of our opening and then our frame. This is 15/16 high. I made this one out of 5/16 inch thick poplar. The joinery is very simple. It's just butt end joinery. It's not a heavy duty drawer, but you can use miters with splines, you can use finger joints, you can use whatever you like. Not to be wasteful, I took some of our trim pieces here that we made for the top end of our frame of our Zen garden, and I've made some corner braces. So I will be gluing these into place just because I had them. You can put a little miter piece in there if you like, whatever you wish. But we're going to glue this whole thing together, and then we're going to put it aside and let it dry up. While we're waiting for our drawer to dry up, I've made the drawer faceplate, and it's just a 1/4 inch thick piece of walnut. It's 1.5 inches wide and 10 inches long. I've also made the drawer pull. And for that, I took a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch piece of walnut. I cut a rabbet in it that was 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch, and then I cut it at a 45-degree angle. Once I got one angle cut, I rotated it 90 degrees on the fence and cut the other angle. And that's what gives you this kind of funky pointed end. So we're gonna give this a sanding and glue this handle in place. Now the drawer pull here ended up being tip to tip 9 inches long. So we'll glue it centered on here, right in the middle, side to side, top to bottom, and we'll put that aside and let it dry. Well, at this point, you should have something that looks like this. And give it a good sanding all over. I've given it a 1/8 round over all the way around the outside edge of our top trim. And now it's time to glue our drawer face on. So you're going to want to glue it onto the front. So just center it on your drawer and glue it in place. While we're waiting for the drawer front to dry up, I have cut some pieces of 3/4 inch MDF. I have cut them to be 1 inch wide, and I have measured the distance between the walls of our Zen Garden frame. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue these in place flush with the edge of our opening and square to the body of our frame. And these will act as drawer guides so that when you're putting the drawer in, it's not going all snaky. It will also be the beginning of the support system that will hold the bed that will have the sand for our Zen Garden. So we'll get these glued into place and then we can move on. Well, at this point, it's time to put in the supports for our sand base. And what I've done is I've taken some scraps of 1/4 inch walnut. You don't have to use walnut. You can use whatever scraps you have lying around. And we're going to glue these pieces in place on top of that 3/4 MDF that we just put there. So we've cut them to length and we'll just slide them in place here and just glue them in. Now, as well as gluing those in, you'll see that we have an extra lip here on the edge of our MDF. Well, I've also cut some other pieces of 1/4 inch thick walnut scrap, 3/4 of an inch wide, and the same distance that is between here. And we will glue these in place as well. I'm not too overly concerned about squeeze out here, only because we're going to be placing another base on top of this. And that's what we're going to do next. So we're going to take a measurement. It should be the same dimensions as the bottom that we cut. And we are going to cut a piece of 1/4 inch MDF to fit around the entire perimeter here inside this space that we just made the supports for. So our MDF piece ended up being 8 inches by 11.5 long. I actually cut it a 1/16 of an inch shy on either end just to give me some wiggle room to get this thing in here. So we're just going to squeeze some glue onto our platform that we created. Just like this. And then we'll just sit our base or our platform in place, weight it down, and let it dry. Now, the one last thing to do here to this platform is once it dries, you want to get in there all around the edges, and you can use either latex caulk or silicone caulking, whatever you have on hand, and just seal up the corners all the way around. Although we left that 1/16 of an inch gap, which leaves a 32nd on either side, it's still enough for sand to get down through. So we want to seal that up completely. Guys, if you've been following along, you should at this point in time have something that looks like this. But unfortunately, we're out of time this week, guys. There is a lot more to come on this build. We're going to get into some very different procedures, and you know what? It's going to be a lot of fun. I hope you're going to join me for that. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the bell so that you don't miss the notifications of future episodes of the show. I want to thank you so much for tuning into the show. I hope you're going to try this project for yourself, and more importantly, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.